Hello, and thank you for listening to Short Subject Cloud Security. The purpose of this talk is really to identify and call out all of the different security requirements around cloud and cloud migrations. Now, we've already talked about in other short subjects the importance of understanding your sensitive data and who's coming after you, and the general principle that the fewer vulnerabilities you have in your environment, the less potential damage there is to your brand. But how does that play out in a cloud model? Because we have more and more clients that are looking for that type of environment for various reasons, and many of them are not fully understanding the true implications of security as it relates to the cloud. They're only looking at how secure the provider is they're contracting with. So in a traditional enterprise model, you can build a ring fence around your closed network. You can implement endpoint and MDM, network and application level security, database security, and of course, behavioral analytics, or if you don't have that, a SEM function or log manager, although those are less preferred. And then of course, identity governance and access management. And that's all well and good in a closed model. But in a cloud environment, you have to open your door, at least a small degree, to an external provider in order to share information or replicate data to a cloud provider. And in doing so, you open up two key vulnerabilities. Number one, you're now passing data through the internet, encrypted or not. And number two, you don't know everything that's going on in the physical data center where your information lives. What types of maintenance crews are in there? Where are they? Where does your data reside? Who are the SOC operators? Who are the network operators and the operations folks? There's a lot of variables that exist, and you can contract to state as many things as you want to, but protection on your side is always a better move. So that becomes even more complicated when you look at who else can access your information, because not only do you have people within your ring fence, you also have folks that are traveling, working from home, in coffee shops and restaurants, who have devices that can access your sensitive information. And if they come into your environment, that's all well and good. You can at least control that. But when they go straight to the cloud, there's now an additional set of vulnerabilities that could exist. For example, somebody walking by and looking over somebody's shoulder to get access to critical cloud information. So there's lots of different ways you could potentially be vulnerable, and the way to help remediate this or help prevent it from happening in the first place is to create the same types of security safeguards between the cloud providers and all of the different points of access that you have within your own ring fence, and then elevate the analytics and the identity governance and access management so that effectively you're able to get a single pane of glass, single view over all of the activity that's happening, and you're not entirely dependent on the cloud provider to protect your cloud information. So you need to abstract a little bit. And what happens is, when you look at this model, you effectively create a bigger version of the same levels of security and protection that you had within your own tight ring fence around your corporate headquarters, but on a much larger and more intangible scale is the best way to describe it. Because you don't know where all this data may live. You don't know where all your people are. But creating these different safeguards is actually not the entire story, because there's some key elements that are considerations for cloud deployment. And the first is governance and training. Cannot reinforce enough the importance of this. And the reason why is because you have a lot of sensitive information. And knowing what that sensitive information is, who can access it, who can touch it in the cloud, who can move it from one place to another within the cloud, or cloud to premise or cloud to device, becomes essential, which becomes a consideration of who has access to your critical data and who has administrative access to your critical data. And do those folks also have access to other points within the environment that could be more vulnerable, like public shares or web-based services? And then finally, understanding, can you do all of this within your regulatory compliance guidelines? Can you make these moves? Can you move data into the cloud and still meet your requirements for audit and GRC? Which brings us to the last point, and that is, even if you can, a lot of times you cannot move data around the world. And especially with software as a service, sometimes that data, as it gets replicated for business continuity, ends up getting shifted around. And so understanding where that information is going to live, where your provider may end up putting it, becomes just as critical as the rest. The other dynamic to understand is really what the different offers are and what those security concerns may be. So you've got infrastructure, platform, and software. And infrastructure is really a data center. You're building your own data center. You're just not paying for the real estate costs. In platform as a service, you're renting, for all intents and purposes, the virtual machine and the operating system, but the applications and everything else are yours to maintain, develop, and own. And then in a software as a service model, all you own is your data that you're putting into somebody else's platform. And there's some pros to this model. So, for example, if you look at it from provider liability, in infrastructure as a service, you assume most of the liability because it's your data center to build and own. In software as a service, because you just own the data, if there's breaches that exist against the platform, the applications, the operating system, or the data center itself, you are somewhat alleviated from litigation in that matter because the provider, it's their responsibility to do those protections and those safeguards. But the flip side of that coin is client control. So if you own the data center, you have total control over all the virtual machines, where they live, what they're running, how they're patched, all the vulnerabilities, and everything in between. As you move over to software as a service, you can customize the application a little bit using APIs or using whatever customization software they're giving you. But for all intents and purposes, you only own the data. And so if you want a new feature or a new enhancement, you've got to wait for that provider to come out with it. So you've got to balance all these different things. Do you have the proper security safeguards between your access points and the cloud data? Do you have the training and governance in place? Have you identified the users? Do you know that you can meet GRC? Do you know where your data is living? And how much control versus how much liability do you want to assume? So the purpose of this talk, and I hope I've made the point, you cannot decouple cloud from security. It's the same conversation and it needs to be addressed holistically. Thank you very much.